All right, we're kicking things off here in the studio. So what we're doing is trying to see A camera, B camera, can you tell a big difference? This is how I did one of my last comparisons and people seem to like it. So honestly, very controlled environment, controlled lighting. So we have 24 to 70 on one of these lenses and we have the 16 to 35 on the other. Same GM lenses, so they should be very similar optically. There may be slight distortion. You're not gonna notice it in a shot like this pretty much. So is there a drastic difference between two of these right now? Can you tell? All right, so we've got the A1 in the middle here, and to the right a little bit, we've got the A7R4. Let's dive in. All right, so this is gonna be the autofocus test. We basically turned both cameras onto the same settings. Right now we're on the A1. Same lens on here, we got the 50mm f1.2. The purpose of this is gonna be because f1.2, it's gonna show us the closest or shortest depth of field, so it should let us know how we're doing in focus. Honestly, the A1 should do pretty well tracking my face, focusing. I did have to change the default settings of focus to make this a fair test over on the A7R4, which we'll switch to here shortly. That is because that basically comes with very medium settings. If you want something more cinematic, you don't want it to jump around a lot, you're gonna wanna use that. However, the A1 comes with much faster settings, especially because of the sports focus. So, what'd you guys think? How'd the focus do? Pretty well lit environment. Let's switch lenses to the A7R4. A7R4, how's it gonna do? We should note, I guess while we're talking through autofocus mode, so this one has basically eye autofocus, they both do. You can do that while shooting 4K 30. Could not do that on the A7R3, so one upgrade with A7R4 here. The other thing is they both have animal eye autofocus. However, this does not have bird eye focus, literally like supposed to focus on bird's eyes. I haven't used it a ton, but it does focus on birds for sure. I need to do some more examples with that. You're not gonna have it on the A7R4. You're just basically gonna get animal eye focus as well as human eye focus. So, do we notice a big difference? Honestly, I don't expect a huge difference out of this because ultimately A7R4, A1, we know the A1 should be better, but A7R4 is still a Sony and Sony's got some really good autofocus. So 50mm f1.2, show some of these side by side for you. There we go. All right, so at this point, we're gonna hop into Lightroom and take a look at some A7R4 versus A1 photos. You'll notice kind of as I click through these, we do some that'll really highlight the dynamic range as well. We've intentionally overexposed a few to see how much we can recover. We're starting off basically right out of the raw images. All of these are shot on basically as close focal distance as I could get, but it's gonna be the 24 to 70 f2.8 GM as well as the 16 to 35 f2.8 GM. So again, as close as possible. I tried to nail focus as close as I could. Some of these, it's not perfect, but it's gonna be very similar. So we'll get a really good sense here. Pre-edit how they're gonna look right out of camera, and then post-edit, I'll just do some auto editing. I think that's gonna be the most fair for this type of comparison, but just giving you a quick click through here of how these were taken right out of camera, just on a nature hike here in lovely Boulder. So starting here with an underexposed one, we can kind of take a look in the dark areas. It's going to be very similar actually when we look at basically highlights in dark areas, overall dynamic range of the two cameras. Similarly here, if we look in some of the more overexposed areas of the tree branches, you can definitely see it's pretty much the same amount of detail. Now again, this is pre-recovery. You notice certain things like blurriness, that's just really gonna be the area I focused on. It's not actually the camera being blurry or the lenses being blurry. Lots of details in this shot, so again, noticing kind of where the focus is. This one I liked a lot because you can just see kind of how things roll off, how the highlights are gonna look. Again, pretty similar. There's definitely some artistic characteristics, I think, between the two, very minor, but once we get into editing, I think the biggest thing you'll notice maybe on these, and we are using a screen recorder, mind you, is gonna be some of the colors. So like here, you can notice a little bit more rich greens, arguably on the A1 on the right. Same thing here, you just notice maybe a little bit more of the coloring coming out of the different areas. I think with that, let's go ahead and dive in and we'll do some auto edits so you can actually see what these look like and how we can recover shadows and highlights. So we're gonna start off on the A7R4 here. Again, just clicking auto, that's gonna give us a lot more detail here in the shadows and highlights. For me, I would still bring the highlights down a bit and we probably bring the shadows up a little bit just to kind of show you the overall dynamic range profile. pretty good there. We'll do the same thing so then we can show you side by side also with the A1. Again, just bringing down the highlights and the shadows. So we'll go back into basically side by side mode. Like as you can see, right, they're gonna be very similar. You really gotta pixel peep if you wanna try to find any large differences between the two images. Another cool one here then, let's go back to develop. In this one, I actually intentionally took it because the moon was out. So once we click auto, we recover a little bit. Now you can see it. So boom, we've got the moon here. This is the A7R4. Let's go over to the A1. We'll click auto as well. Just give it a quick, nice edit. Boom, moon's back. Nice blue skies. Let's see what these two look like side by side now. I think what we're proving here, I mean, to me, is that they're both great stills cameras, right? We're at a 200% zoom right now. It's just, they're all gonna do great jobs with detail. I will say for me, given the focusing system on the A1, like it's gonna nail basically where you wanna shoot. It always does a great job. But in terms of just overall dynamic range, pretty darn similar. I don't know if any of you two could pick these out of the lineup. If I showed A versus B and said which one's arguably better, they're pretty darn similar. So let's go to the last one here I wanna show you. And so this is gonna recover some shadows. You can see a good amount of detail. We do see a slight bit of noise. This is A7R4 on some of the whatever pedals here. 400% zoom. Like the detail on these things is just crazy, right? You got 61 megapixels here. Let's see if we can bounce that up even a little bit more. Yeah, so we can still get even more detail out of that. Let's go over to the A1, do the same thing. Same shot here. Again, very similar at this point. It's tough to say. I mean, there's arguably maybe a little more detail on the A1, even though it's less megapixels. I mean, overall, right? Just both do an insane job when you look at how much that was zoomed in. Sunset looks good. We can see a lot of the green grass, nice fall off, nice bokeh. Both are gonna be great stills cameras. You really can't go wrong with either. So the fact you can shoot shutter speed with 1/32,000th, I mean, it's nice to have, especially if it's super bright and you wanna shoot at something like f1.2 on the 50mm zoom, that is gonna be an option. Also shooting obviously 30 frames per second. Electronic shutter, 20 frames per second mechanical, and then you've got 10 on the A7R4. If you're doing action, you're doing certain wildlife, 10 is still pretty darn good, let's be honest, right? Especially with the autofocus that we get on both systems. There's other photos in here, guys. I will try to upload them so you can download these if you want the raw files for yourselves that I took so you can pixel peep a little bit more. But that's gonna be it for the stills comparison. Let's roll into the rest of the video. Let's talk about some major differences between the two, just kind of starting off, and actually similarities as well. So A7R4, obviously gonna have the older Sony interface. Really didn't think that mattered, but it's funny, once I started using the A7S3, which we're filming on, and the A1, I kind of got used to the new interface, and it is actually a lot more usable, even though it doesn't look drastically different. So with that then, the only other major difference is memory card slots. You got SD versus CF Express Type A or SD over here. Much faster shutter speed on here. Last but not least for me, there's two major things that the A1 has, which I really like that is not on the A7R4. Controls over here. Basically, this is gonna allow you to change your focus, autofocus single, continuous, etc., as well as your shooting modes. So if I wanna do high plus, 30 frames per second, electronic, 20 frames per second, mechanical, boom, it's all readily available here. And it's funny because I've seen people complain about this. I love having it right here, quite frankly, so I'm really excited to be able to just twist a knob and I can change that on the fly very easily. The other big thing for me with video is this has gyro data on it. So when you're editing video recorded on this camera, the A1, A7S3 has this, as well as the A7C. A7R4 does not. All that gyro data is gonna output onto every video file automatically. Sony has a software called Catalyst. You basically plug it in there. You do have to do it one by one video, which is the only annoying thing I found. But you're getting honestly like GoPro footage out of this. You can really stabilize things, especially depending on how much you want to play with the crop mode on it. All right, so now we're on the A1, and a few things to like about this camera. Sadly, there is no flip out screen, however. That's gonna be consistent for both of these, the A7R4 and the A1. The thing that's nice about that is I can see during these times, like how is the actual exposure looking. Let's do a side-by-side comparison now of stabilization as well, so you'll get a sense of how these two compare. A1 does have active stabilization, which is gonna be, the optical plus kind of a digital crop. The A7R4 does not. Obviously you can try to do that in post, but it's much nicer when it just comes out of the camera that way. I have a 1:5 stop ND filter on here. I can actually change the ISO, even in S-Log3, lower than base ISO, which is 800 on the A1 here. So let's do that right now, because that way on these more overexposed shots, rather than messing with the shutter speed, I can actually lower the ISO. So right now, for example, we are in 200, 250, 320, 400, 500, 640, and now 800, to where it's probably a little bit overexposed or maybe right on. So again, a nice thing. Let's switch over to the A7R4 now. We'll kind of walk around in the field again. Exact same lens at this point. We're not doing different lenses. We have the exact same lens. I'm swapping them between the two cameras. And now another thing to call out is I am shooting on S-Log3 on both of these. That's because I think that's a fair comparison. I know the A7R4 is not going to do as well as the A1, obviously, but that's what I want to show you guys, is what is the differences in upgrade. I'd probably go with S-Log2 on here, but I'm using my A7S3 as my primary camera, and I'm always going with S-Log3 on there. So again, just kind of switching around here. How's the dynamic range handling with this? Now, one thing I do love about both of these both have the smart hot shoe on top of the cameras. So right now I'm actually using the ECM B1M shotgun, which has been a dream. It's small, the sound quality is just as good as the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus that I've been using for a while now, and you can't clip. So your audio levels are always perfect. So happy with this microphone. Definitely recommend it if you have a camera that's going to be capable of it. Any of the newer Sonys, A7C, A7R4, and newer should have that capability. So at the end of the day, we realize there's just two great cameras here, right? You really can't go wrong with either. The question is, how much do you want to spend and what are your use cases? If you really need sports photography, if you want to future-proof, if you have the extra budget, if video is the majority of your workflow, A1 is the way to go in my opinion. If it's stills-centric, even wildlife, honestly, I think the A7R4 is gonna do a lot of you great out there because, again, 10 frames a second is still plenty fast to catch a lot of wildlife. And then on top of that, it still has 4K 30, good video out of here. You can run S-Log3 if you want to, as you saw. Sure, the colors aren't gonna be quite as good, but you can always edit those in post. So stills-centric, A7R4 is a great camera to go with. That's gonna do it, guys. Let me know what you think below. Which one would you get, A1, A7R4? I did get a good deal on this. I actually somehow found a used one on B&H, so it was $1,000 off, and I have a credit card with them that allows me to not pay tax. That was a big reason why I got this. Basically saved me $1,500. Had that not been the case, it would have been a much tougher decision to choose whether to get this or not, but that said, A1 is such a fun camera to have. Leave any questions in the comments below. As always, guys, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you next time.